Selamat siang, good day everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Our dear colleagues from Research Center for Politics of BRIN and also from the Indo-Pacific Research Center at Perth, Australia. On behalf of the committee and civitas of the Research Center for Politics, introduce myself. My name is Irene. Welcome, Dr. Ian, Dr. Martin, our dear head of Research Center, Dr. Atika Nur Alami, Professor Ganewati Wuryandari as speakers. We welcome you to this very interesting session as part of our collaboration. Without further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Atika Nur Alami, as the head of Research Center for Politics BRIN, to deliver the opening remarks. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Irin. Can you hear me? I'm audible, ya? Okay. Yes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on energy transition governance, the experience of Australia and Indonesia. This webinar is jointly hosted by Research Center for Politics at BRIN and the Indo-Pacific Research Center (IPRC) at Murdoch University. My thanks to our speakers, Associate Professor Martin Brueckner from Murdoch University. Thank you for joining us, Prof. Martin, and also Prof. Ganewati Wuryandari, our senior researcher at BRIN. Thanks also our moderator, Dr. Irene, as well as Prof. Jacqueline Low, the director of IPRC, and probably everyone who has taken the time to join us. Before we begin, maybe just a bit of context that actually this webinar is not a one-off event. It is part of the ongoing research collaboration between our institution, BRIN and IPRC, under the research project on challenges of democratic representation, implication for governance, security, international relation, and regional cooperation. And BRIN and IPRC, the two institutions, convene bi-monthly webinar series together with hosting duties alternating between Murdoch University and BRIN. And each session of webinar explores a different theme under the project. And in today's first webinar, we will explore an interesting theme on energy transition governance. So why this topic matter? The energy transition is not, kind of a simply kind of a technical or financial issues or challenges. Importantly, it is a governance challenge, how to align the energy transition agenda with international commitment, national policies, local governments, industry, and communities is important to be discussed. And Australia, Indonesia, actually different in many respects, but we face several common challenges in terms of energy transition agenda. Both countries, Indonesia, Australia, are resource-rich economies. Both also must translate national ambition into local implementation. And Indonesia, Australia also have made, kind of a significant international commitments, such as net zero targets, and also the Just Energy Transition Partnership that must now be aligned with domestic political realities. And today's session is a great opportunity to place both experiences side by side and draw out that what may be useful to each side. And in today's webinar, we hope to explore what has worked and what has not worked probably in both countries in coordinating energy policy across levels of government. And we'll also touch on the political dimension of this transition. And we will also consider what meaningful collaboration between Australia and Indonesia on energy transition can look like in practice beyond our, kind of a joint statements. Finally, I think I thank the organizing teams from BRIN and IPRC for preparing this webinar, and I express my appreciation to all speakers, Prof. Martin and Prof. Ganewati Wuryandari, and also participants for contributing your expertise and time. I think that's all from me. I look forward to a constructive and insightful discussion. With that, it is my pleasure to open today's webinar. Thank you and terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Atika, thank you so much for the insightful opening. But before we proceed, I would like to also remind the committee of this seminar to play first our national anthem. Usually it played before the opening speak, but apologize beforehand. Okay, let's hear it together. Now we will start the discussion, and I will start first by introducing our honorable guest, Associate Professor Martin Brueckner, the Pro Vice Chancellor Sustainability in the Vice Chancellery at Murdoch University. Professor Brueckner, how are you?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. We can all hear you. So Professor Brueckner will speak on Australia's energy transition, assessing the progress and counting the cost. He had sent to us the very interesting and insightful abstract. Let's hear from him. Presentation will take us beyond the headline figures and ambitions of the green energy transition, and will ask us to consider some of its material realities, particularly the renewable energy technologies themselves and the environmental and social costs associated with extracting and processing the materials required for this transition. So, Professor Brueckner, you have approximately 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I very much appreciate the opportunity. Sorry, I'm just working on my technology here. Thank you for the introduction. And as we've just heard, yes, this presentation is about a stock take on Australia's energy transition with a particular focus on the often hidden side of that transition as it relates to both social and environmental cost. And of course, especially as it relates to the critical minerals that underpin that transition and what the extraction and refining of those material entails. Before I start, it is customary in Australia to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Murdoch University, this is from where I'm joining this webinar today, sits on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Also recognizing that the place where Murdoch University is situated has been a place of teaching and learning for millennia, but also has been a place for taking care of country. And that is a good segue to this presentation today, because when we're talking about the energy transition, which primarily serves the purpose of protecting humanity from the ill effects of climate change, this is all very much related to taking good care of country. So when I present today about Australia's energy transition, this is not just work that I'm doing. This is work that is done by a number of staff across the IPRC and within the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. So what I'm presenting today is a bit of a mashup of different types of research that, however, feed into a coherent narrative on what some would consider the underbelly or the dark side of Australia's energy transition. So where are we at with this transition? And this sort of slide provides us with a bit of a snapshot. And it's generally seen when we look at the figures as a success story, given that the Australian economy has principally been powered by fossil fuels for most of this last century, to now count renewables as to the tune of 43% in terms of generation capacity within the grid is considered an enormous success. Last year, roughly 5 gigawatt of renewable capacity were being added to the grid in the form of solar and wind power, and we tripled the deployment of batteries within.
Apologize, Professor, we cannot read your slides. Have you put it on share?
Yes, they are being shared.
But we cannot see it from here. So you need to put it open on your desktop and then
Yes.
click the screen share from the Zoom menu.
So what is it that you see?
Your face.
Just my face, so that is not good enough.
Now I think, yes, now we can see it.
Can you still see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, okay, these are the figures that I was alluding to, that renewables now make up 43% of generation capacity within the national grid. Last year, 5 gigawatt were being added in the form of wind and solar, and the country doubled down on its deployment of batteries for home and industry. So that is the current state of play. However, despite the fact that now renewables power 43% of the national grid, much of that extra capacity is only meeting growing demand. The demand is growing largely because of the electrification of industrial processes, electrification of transport, and most notably, the rollout of data centers all across the country. You see on the image on the right that this is a substantial growth that we are looking at between now and the beginning of the next decade, which will absorb much of additional renewable energy capacity and probably increase also our reliance on the continued use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuel projects continue to be approved, despite the fact that the country has made a net zero pledge by 2050, 35 projects by February this year alone. So we still see that despite net zero pledges, that our continued reliance on fossil fuels is pretty much locked in. Also, when it comes to our overall decarbonization effort, much of that is actually being done by virtue of having abandoned land clearing. So land use and land use changes in forestry are largely responsible for the reduction in Australian emissions, in that industry decarbonization is still fairly sluggish to this date. Also, that what some would consider to be an accounting trick, that we, albeit in line with international carbon accounting standards, that Scope 3 emissions are excluded from the Australian emissions tally, which would, if excluded, only make us responsible for 1% of global emissions. However, if accounted for, given the carbon intensity of Australian exports, would lift Australia will lift Australia's contribution to 4.5% of global fossil fuel CO2 emissions. Now, the need for decarbonisation is clear. We see that climate change is just one of the 7 planetary boundaries that are already being crossed, and of course affecting or many other planetary boundaries, such as freshwater, the integrity of the biosphere, ocean acidification. All of that is directly affected by greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And Australia, of course, which is already looking at a worsening state of its natural environment, is by many seen as a petri dish for climate change. And the one example here that is visible on the right is the dramatic reductions in annual rainfall in the southern parts of the country, which affects livability, affects food security, and affects freshwater availability, and of course makes the country, which is already bushfire prone, even more prone to natural disasters. So Australia, in that sense, has a very large stake in global efforts on decarbonisation.
Professor, excuse me, could you put the view screen share, because it's a bit of small. So full view at the presenter's view, as a presenter's view. So above the Zoom workplace in your desktop, you could see view.
It's
above the slide that open. Click view and then click presenter's view if possible.
okay. I apologise. Well, please bear with me. First, I have to get out of my presentation.
That's okay, take your time.
Okay, I'm selecting the screen. Sorry. Now talk me through it again. What do I need to do?
Okay, see the right corner on your screen, the share screen.
Yeah.
And then click presenter's view.
I have content only, over the shoulder, side by side, add as background.
Okay, wait a sec. Please, Mario, can you guide Professor Brueckner? Thank you. Wait a sec, Prof.
Yeah. And then you can open your presentation. Okay. And then at the nice.
Yes, now we can see
Thank
it. Thank you.
Again?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, apologies for the
Yes.
technical difficulties. So you have a full screen in front of you now?
Yes.
Okay. Again, my apologies.
It's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so the colleagues of mine and I will be working on the energy transition from the vantage point that what society is being presented with is a ruse. That is to say that the impression is being given that the economy is transitioning away from fossil fuels towards renewables, where in real terms a real transition is yet to happen, let alone a just transition, which also ensures that communities who bear the cost are adequately compensated and that everybody has an equal share in the gains of a renewable energy transition. So in many ways, what we are looking at is a discursive transition where the Prime Minister of the country, as well as other members of government, are very vocal about the progress that is being made and about Australia's leadership within the green transition space, very much keen to position Australia as a renewable energy superpower and enabling, in that sense, others and our trading partners and allies to be part and beneficiaries of that leadership role. Overall, the country is committed to net zero by 2050 and considers itself well positioned to reach that target. Interestingly, industry is on board. In fact, all the major mining companies, including those who have been very invested in the maintenance of the status quo, have seized on the language of green energy transition and now officially all play a very active role when it comes to supporting and being part of a transition to a low carbon economy. So the excerpts that you see here are direct from the corporate communications of the various companies who position themselves very much as drivers of a green energy transition. However, when we look more broadly, we see, especially within mining, that whilst grid decarbonization is real and it is happening, overall, as far as economy-wide decarbonization is concerned, it's a very different story. The case of Western Australia that is shown on the right-hand side in front of you actually shows that in terms of the economy, the state economy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually only slightly tipping upwards, so a far cry from decarbonization. But what's particularly tipping up the overall state's emission is resource extraction, where we've seen over the last 20 years that emissions have actually increased by 200%. Now, critical minerals are said to underpin the renewable energy transition. Western Australia considers itself very well placed, given its resource endowments, to play a key part in servicing the green energy transitions through the extraction and processing of critical minerals, which is, of course, raising the specter of an even further and steeper growth in greenhouse gas emissions moving forward. So overall, the carbon footprint of the resource sector is poised to increase dramatically over the next decade or two. Globally, energy historians have made the case that to this day, society or the global world community has not really seen the displacement of fossil fuels. Any new source of any new energy source that has been found has basically been added to the mix. So that's to say that coal has not replaced the use of timber, oil has not displaced the use of coal and or timber, and so on. So even with the adoption of nuclear power and wind and solar, we have not seen a reduction in the global use of coal or any other of the fossil fuels which the renewables are actually meant to displace. The argument is generally that within growth economies, any additional energy, so exergy as engineers would call it, available energy is happily being absorbed because it happens to drive further economic growth, which is critically dependent on available energy. So as opposed to looking at a transition away from fossil fuels, we're simply seeing an addition of renewables to an already large energy mix. And in that sense, what we're looking at is the use and the employment of the transition terminology, but it is somewhat of an empty signifier, and that everybody can agree that a transition is necessary, and everybody agrees that a green transition in particular is what is needed. However, various players who invoke the language have very different projects in mind as part of that transition discourse, and that obviously lays bare a number of deep contradictions that that this research is looking at, that, for instance, the status quo, especially as it relates to fossil fuel interests, is being maintained. Abled further, and while we also see a continued lock-in when it comes to the country's weddedness to fossil fuels, is that we have a very close, some would say too close, relationship between the political class and industry leaders, especially those within the extractive sectors, that to this day fossil fuel subsidies dwarf by far any investments made in renewable energy infrastructure, that increases in pollution and exceedance of government limits set by industry can simply be compensated through the use of carbon offsets, which have questionable legitimacy and certainly do not drive emission reductions, and that there's very little media attention when it comes to these tensions, if you like, and that in many ways the continued expansion of fossil fuel projects within the Australian economy is often described as a necessity, and that any further pro-environmental policy settings would be a threat to the country's economic interests. And that despite the fact that we have more exacting regulations when it comes to climate change related reporting, that this has not really delivered any structural changes, and that current ESG frameworks have largely been allowed to be used to legitimize a business as usual approach. Now, the final point that I would want to draw attention to is that specific case of critical minerals and this whole issue of securitization. As you may be aware, Australia has signed a critical minerals partnership with the United States, which commits both sides to investments in the critical mineral space and for Australia to become a reliable partner when it comes to the provision of critical minerals to the United States. Here are just some select minerals and the projected demand growth over the next 5 to 15 years, and you see a dramatic increase in the volumes that will be required, and already a number of major projects have both been announced and committed to here in Australia. So given the emission intensity that I mentioned earlier, and that you see here now also in front of you, and you can see that critical minerals, when it comes to their refining, are very energy intensive, and in that sense also emission intensive if serviced through conventional fossil fuels, that any emission reduction ambitions by government would be greatly undermined if the refining of critical minerals was to occur at scale here in Australia. For geopolitical reasons, it can be understood as to why there might be a desire from the United States and Australia to foster critical minerals processing here in Australia, but at the same time, we need to be alive to the fact that this comes at a hefty cost in terms of additional greenhouse gas emissions, if not met through renewable energy resources. And in that sense, there's also a critical minerals roost to our reading that whilst Australia's critical minerals strategy that has been released in June 23 speaks of the critical minerals sector as a driver of clean energy here in Australia and globally, if looking at the most recent information coming from the Auckland Institute, that basically shows that despite this narrative that the lion's share of critical minerals will be needed to drive a green energy transition, that in real terms, less than 30% of critical minerals are actually being used for renewable energy technologies, and that generally it is for the benefit of industries that are unrelated to the energy transition, whether it's the semiconductor industry, military, and the like, are the likely takers of critical minerals as opposed to renewable energy technology manufacturers. So not only have we made this commitment, this commitment is also securitized to develop critical minerals, and Australia over the last 5 years has gone some distance to ensure that a number of minerals are now on the critical minerals list, and that basically gives rise to a change of their status, that they're no longer ordinary materials, but these are exceptional assets which require and justify extraordinary policy measures, which again are at a potential risk or to the potential detriment to social and environmental systems. So the broader impact is that by framing critical minerals as a national security priority, it has a bearing on how social and environmental risks are being perceived, and the risk, of course, being that they're being treated as secondary concerns. So securitization doesn't abolish the rule of law within the country, but what it does do, it changes the way in which other concerns are being treated in the name of the urgency of producing and providing critical minerals. And just to give you some examples, in terms of the environmental conflict potential, which is already part and parcel of resources extraction, but it's just exacerbated through the enormous growth in critical minerals production, is that we have, of course, increasing environmental impacts associated with it, in particular the water intensity, which is frequently overlooked, is a particular concern, especially for us here in Australia, being the driest continent on Earth. So freshwater availability is a concern, especially in the context of a drying climate. Plus, of course, the long-term liabilities that would be part and parcel of both critical minerals extraction as well as refining as it relates to tailings, mine rehabilitation, acid drainage, and so forth. Again, on the social side, these conflicts are not new, or the conflict potential is not new. But what's interesting, especially in relation to critical minerals, is that close to 80% of critical mineral projects are all found on either First Nations land or on land where there are native title claims. So in that sense, the clash between indigenous cultural values and industry interests is pre-programmed. And of course, one particular threat here is the destruction of cultural heritage and significant sites, with many remote communities also very much from a livelihood and survival perspective being critically dependent on the integrity of environmental systems. Food and freshwater security is also put at risk. And of course, one other effect, and this is sort of what this recent announcement from the Pentagon has made clear, that we have the sort of extraterritorial control over critical minerals, where local communities find out by morning press release that next door a critical mineral process a project will go ahead. So the securitization and the internationalization of critical minerals production here in Australia also means that there's very little local control over developments, and that of course has an impact on the social license of those critical mineral projects, in that control is exercised externally. So to wrap this up, the broader structural effects, the way we see it, is that these sort of developments seemingly give rise, especially under securitization, to what is sort of called asymmetric governance, in that critical minerals projects are being fast-tracked because they are in the national interest, whereas processes for social and environmental protection are on the slow lane and are potentially underfunded. Securitization also gives rise to these, what I've mentioned earlier, in terms of extraordinary measures, and that we have an approval architecture that is very much designed to facilitate fast project approvals. And even where there might be some social resistance, a political desire to make these things happen basically overrides community concerns, and communities themselves are left with limited appeals rights under securitized laws. And but we also seen in Australia, across the board, across different jurisdictions, is that protest against unwanted forms of development are also increasingly being criminalized, with very hefty fines given to protesters. And in an Australian context, the energy transition can also sort of be seen through a green colonialism lens, in that we are basically continuing with a colonial extractive logic. How actually what is now has changed, that this is now a new veneer of legitimacy, as it is put here, in that these measures are being justified in the name of a green energy transition for the benefit of Australians and the wider community. The final point is that there's a certain irony to all of this, in that securitization is meant to deliver higher levels of security, whereas the effects, as outlined here, would have the opposite effect, is that rammed through policy measures could drive further ecosystem decline, could drive further food insecurity, and indeed increase our climate vulnerability, given the enormous energy intensity that is associated with critical mineral refining. There's pre-programmed increases in social conflict and social license losses as a result of projects that might be locally unwanted, simply because of processes that no longer rely on community participation and community approval. And all of that combined then also puts question marks over Australia's credibility as a supplier of choice when it comes to critical minerals. So the end point being that unless this push towards a green energy transition, push towards critical minerals production is accompanied by structural changes, and the green energy transition will be a continuation of that colonial extractivist history and story that we've had in Australia for the last 200 years. I shall leave it there. Thank you very much, and again, apologies for the technical hiccups prior.
Thank you. Let's give some applause to a very brilliant presentation of Professor Brueckner. We really enjoy your topic, Professor. And I think you have encouraged us to look at the energy transition from a perspective that is sometimes less visible in public discussions. The material dimension of the transition is quite obvious, especially when we're talking about the securitization of energy transition, which I think is a very familiar situation in Indonesia. It was interesting. Recently, we had a discussion with one of our government agency and look into the strategy, milestone, etc. And I think we can definitely learn from Australia in that aspect. We often speak also, considering your perspective about renewable energy, as if the transition were simply a matter of replacing fossil fuels with clean technologies, which also you mentioned that those technologies themselves require minerals, infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, investment, and importantly, processes of extraction and production that can have environmental and social consequences, as you mentioned in your last slide. So this actually raises the very important governance questions as the theme of this seminar. How to ensure that the transition is cleaner? Transition to cleaner energy does not simply move environmental and social costs from one part of the energy system to another. Very straightly and well put point. And this question will become particularly interesting when we compare Australia's experience with Indonesia's position in the regional and global energy transition. And that brings us naturally to our second speaker today, introducing Professor Dr. Ganewati Wuryandari, as actually a Flinders PhD alumni as well, and Monash University. I hope I'm not wrong. Professor Ganewati Wuryandari is a research professor and also senior researcher at the Research Center for Politics BRIN, and her expertise are on foreign policy. And recently, she also became our coordinator in doing a study on energy transition. Her topic will be Beyond the US-China Binary, Indonesia's Network Hedging in the Energy Transition. Time is yours, approximately 20 minutes, Professor Wuryandari.
Okay. Thank you, Irene, for your wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted today to have an opportunity to share my current research and then discuss idea with you when it's completed. My presentation outline, next, Mario. Yeah, my presentation outlined preliminary findings from the ongoing study by the Foreign Policy Research Team at the Research Center for Politics BRINs, titled The Direction of Energy Transition Indonesia in the Midst of the US-China Rivalry. Today, my focus on Beyond the US-China Binary Indonesia Network Hedging in the Energy Transition. In my presentation, I will examine Indonesia green energy shift through the analytical lens of hedging, how Indonesia seeks to pursue opportunity from the transition while managing the risk of strategic dependence amid the intensifying grid power competition. For Indonesia as middle power, the green transition presents a dual challenge. It offers industrial upgrading and economic modernization, while it also creating a potential new dependencies, ties on foreign technology, capital, as well as in supply chains. To ground this analysis empirically, I will use our field research data, which is conducted in West Java in June 2026, including in Cirata floating solar installation and the Legok Nangka waste to energy project. These cases allow us to examine how the macro level national strategic objective interact with subnational energy governance and the implementation. Yeah, next. Yeah. Why Indonesia matters in the US-China rivalry on energy transition? The US-China rivalry and Indonesia energy transition, I think, is best understood not simply as competition over renewable energy, but as a broader contrast over critical minerals, batteries, electric vehicle, industrial technology, finance, and standard setting. Indonesia is particularly important because not only that Indonesia rich of natural resources and also pivotal geographic position, Indonesia is also big potential market, and also that Indonesia very important in the critical intersection of global clean energy supply chains. Yeah. To look at the rivalry between US-China, I think is particularly visible in the critical mineral, nickel, and EV sectors. Our 2025 research on critical mineral found out that China holds advantage in capital technology, engineering, construction, and control over downstreaming value chain processing. Chinese company control roughly over 70% of Indonesian nickel refining capacity, as well as China dominant buyer of 82% of Indonesian nickel export. For Washington, I think the concern extend beyond more the China ownership patterns. Washington primary concern centers on supply chain security and China growing dominant over vital stages of global clean energy architecture. This is, I think, where the US-China rivalry become interesting next. Yeah, because Indonesia seek to avoid both dependence on any single grid power. Instead, it practices what we describe as network hedging, simultaneously engaging multiple external actors, including China, the US, Japan, South Korea, European nation, Australia, and also United Arab Emirates to diversify partnership and preserve strategic flexibility. At the same time, Indonesia government also deploy domestic policy instrument, including using state-owned enterprises, national strategic project strategis nasional, as part of the securitization, like Professor already also used in Australia. Complex financing framework, procurement mandate, and also strict to local content requirement to strengthen domestic capabilities and preserve its strategic autonomy. Okay, next. Now I will move to to illustrate or to explain the research finding from the empirical case study for our research. First is Cirata floating solar project This is the most important renewable energy project in Indonesia, built in 2022. This project is the biggest, I think, in Southeast Asia. It's the largest scale of floating photovoltaic power plant built on the surface of the Cirata Reservoir. It spans around to 20,000 hectares out of the 65 hectares of Cirata Reservoir, and generating approximately 192 megawatt of electricity. This project exemplifies bilateral cooperation through major venture between Indonesian government, represented by PLN Nusantara Renewable, and Masdar. Masdar is UAE state-owned renewable energy company with investor from United Arab Emirates, showcase the expansion of Gulf capital into Indonesia green sector. Nah, interestingly, despite the this project illustrate also that investor nationality and technology supply chains frequently differs, because despite the Indonesia and UAE ownership structure, China engineering and procurement and construction firm and equipment supply were heavily utilized in Cirata. So Cirata, I think, serves as a prime empirical example of energy geopolitics and multi-alignment, demonstrating Indonesia's success in diversifying external patterns across traditional Western, Chinese, and Gulf economies. While the sovereign financial ownership and policy control are securely maintained by state entities, the project revealed that persistent of technology and engineering vulnerabilities regarding foreign supply chains reliance. So, shortly, in a nutshell, I think Cirata encapsulates the key empirical paradox for middle power statecraft. It represents definitive success in international partner diversification, yet expose ongoing vulnerability in domestic technology self-sufficiency. Okay, the second case study for our research is we collect data in the Legok Nangka. Legok Nangka is one of Indonesia's most important waste-to-energy project. It is situated in the in Bandung Regency, spanning around 82 hectares. This project is designed to process approximately more than 2,000 tons of municipal waste daily from 6 regional jurisdictions, from Bandung City, Bandung Regency, West Bandung, Cimahi City, Sumedang, and also Garut. It generates nearly 40 megawatt of electricity. As well as in Cirata is designed as national strategic project. Legok Nangka also this operate under the government to business entity framework between the West Java provincial government and PT Jabar Environment Solution. PT JES is a private consortium Japanese entity, Sumitomo Corporation, and Hitachi Yosen Innova, alongside with PT Energia Prima Nusantara. The Legok Nangka case study illustrates Indonesia's strategic diversification away from China's dominance in the renewable sector by channeling Japanese technology and financial cooperation into the infrastructure modernization. However, this project unfortunately has faced 17 years implementation delay, driven by contractual renegotiation, complex tariff discussion, and coordination failure across provincial, municipal, and central state agency. Because of the long delay, it caused unmet local employment expectation. Because when people relinquish the land in 2009, they expect with the Lego project they will get the employment from the new project built. But unfortunately, they waited until now for 70 years. So they are very generating local frustration. Okay, next. Okay, so based our field research both in Cirata and Legok Nangka revealed that important gap between high-level diplomatic hedging and realities of implementing green transition project on the ground. At the national level, Indonesia diplomatic strategy helped preserve strategic autonomy by diversifying external partnership. However, this autonomy is unevenly realized because implementation remains constrained by domestic institutional bottleneck, regulatory uncertainty, PLN central role, and also limited community participation. In discussion with the provincial official in Bandung on June 2006, we found that local land permits were generally manageable. However, project implementation could not proceed until special zoning confirmation was obtained from the Ministry of Public Works and Housing. This illustrates how coordination across level of government can create significant execution gap. The second challenge is regulatory unpredictability. Changes and uncertainty surrounding tariff and then local product requirements and environmental compliance create an uncertain investment environment, with investor often having to navigate different signals from central government as well as from the regional authority. Finally, there is what we identify as PLN bottleneck. PLN is state electricity entity. The field research, our field research highlight that PLN central role in determining power purchases agreement (PPA), electricity tariff, and grid integration. This prolonged tariff negotiation and unresolved PPA arrangement can delay private sector project and constrain the pace at which renewable energy can be deployed. So, come to the final of my presentation. Indonesia energy transition, I think, serve as a vital empirical lens for observing contemporary hedging. It is successfully preventing exclusive geopolitical subordination and preserving autonomy aligned with the foundational independent active, bebas active doctrine through multi-partner engagement. However, macro level network hedging remain incomplete without domestic institutional depth. The broader finding is therefore very clear that diplomatic agility can create strategic space, but strategic autonomy ultimately depends on the state capacity to execute domestically. In the long run, ultimately, Indonesia's strategic autonomy in the green era depends on strengthening regulatory capacity and then cultivating domestic technological capabilities and streamline interagency coordination. This is all that I can share to this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's have some applause and appreciations for both of the speakers. Actually, the perspective of both speakers are quite complementary, although perhaps they talk from different sides. But what I could absorb from both presentations, if the first presentation asks us to consider the material cost of transition, the second asks us to consider the geopolitical, institutional, and strategic dimension of governing that transition. And also, Professor Brueckner has highlighted Australia's progress towards a green energy future, but also drawing attention at the same time to the materialities and environmental and social costs associated with renewable energy transition. So what I would like to do is moderated discussion by bringing these two perspectives together. Rather than treating Australia and Indonesia as two separate cases, perhaps I would like to try and explore what these experiences tell us about how energy transition should actually be governed. So before I ask audience to ask questions by raising your hand in this icon and your Zoom, respectively, our speakers can also ask questions to each other or perhaps instigate comments toward each other. And this is a very dynamic and, well, not too formal, but also we can say semi-informal discussion. So time is yours. If anyone want to raise their hand. Anyone? Maybe Bapak Wasis? We have our colleagues studying in Murdoch at the moment among the audience, Bapak Wasisto. I would like also invite our friends if they want to ask questions.
Excuse me. I
Yes.
will question.
Yes. Please mention your name and short
Okay.
question directed to whom. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Alfandi Irawan, and I'm from Bangka Belitung. I study in University of Bangka Belitung, and the region dependent on the tin mining. Indonesia is now promising economic justice, mineral downstreaming, and industrialization, while promising itself an important supplier of critical mineral for the global energy transition. But my perspective in Bangka Belitung, there is a paradox. A region can be a rich mineral while many its community remain economically variable, and the government can promote industrialization while mineral government at the local level is still weak. This make me wonder about something beyond the usual discussion of the sustainability. If the global energy transition require more mineral from place like a Bangka Belitung, are we actually creating a green transition, or are we simply moving to social environmental cost of the old fossil fuel economy into the mineral producing regions? And considering that Bangka Belitung as a potential uranium resource, which has could become relevant to Indonesian future nuclear energy development, who should have the right to decline how this resource are used? The national government, industrial or community living on the top, on the time. Thank you, ma'am. It's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Hosea. Perhaps Professor Martin or Ibu Ganewati want to address it first. This is a very intricate situation in Bangka Belitung Island in Sumatra. I also invite Professor Ian Wilson if wanted to share comments later on. So Professor Brueckner, perhaps you first, and then Professor Ganewati.
Well, thanks for the question. It's certainly an interesting one. What we don't have is a global analysis of the way in which the renewable energy transition displaces fossil fuels. So in that sense, there's no definitive answer to what extent, even in places like China, which have moved with great strides towards decarbonization, whether the attendant impacts of decarbonization, i.e. the material underpinnings of the green energy transition, outstrip the benefits from low emission technologies. So in that sense, the jury is still out there. I guess the biggest problem is, and this is sort of what I tried to put my finger at, is that we are not trying to meet an existing but a growing energy demand. So we're moving ahead as if the energy problem is solved, but we're playing perpetual catch up. So if I look at Australia in particular, where energy demand is growing because of the electrification of virtually everything, and the turbocharging of energy demand as a result of the proliferation of data centers, it is virtually an impossibility of catching up with renewables. And we now, in places like Western Australia, are now replacing fossil fuel infrastructure with new fossil fuel infrastructure, which we hope we would see the departure of entirely, but we're now underwriting the grid with new gas infrastructure, for instance. And we will see that probably play out nationwide. So in many ways, a green energy transition is welcomed, but because it is one that occurs within the context of globally still growing energy demand, it is simply being absorbed. So it doesn't displace anything. So otherwise, if we were to phase out fossil fuels entirely, then I suppose the short-term cost of critical mineral extraction and refining could be absorbed, but it basically adds to the emission tally. So we see in that sense a worsening of greenhouse gas emissions. That would be my roundabout answer to that.
Thank you, Prof. Professor Dari, you would to add some points to the question?
Yeah, thank you for the interesting question. Yeah, and fortunately that our team have opportunity to went to Morowali last year. We went to the nickel company, apa? PT Morowali, ya. PT Morowali. Yeah, it's very clear that the Morowali actually which produce nickel for actually to contribute for the green energy. However, we found out that as you already mentioned that there's a paradox actually that this Morowali nickel company particularly there's a paradox in there because Indonesia is one of the world dominant source of nickel and has attracted major investment in nickel mining and processing the supply coal of battery and EV industry. But at the same time, Indonesia nickel processing which will look at the Morowali facilities have been powered by coal-fired captive power plants. So in the sense that while that Indonesia is producing material for the global energy transition, but at the same time, much of the nickel processing still using the highly carbon intensive. However, we also find out when we went to field research that there's growing awareness in the company itself because when they produce electricity to generating their industry, some have already replaced by using the source which is green. So it's not all from the coal. That's it. Yeah, but we realized that paradox is still there. That one that we would like to produce material essential for global energy transition, but at the same time, much of the industry still using highly carbon. So I think for the future, there is need for the strict regulation for the using of the carbon for generating electricity and so on.
Thank you, Professor Dari. Anyone want to add comments or raise?
Maybe I have questions
Yes.
to Professor Brueckner.
Could you raise your hand in the menu first? So it is easy to spot. Pak Siswanto, is it?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Professor Brueckner, as you know that Australia is look like Indonesia is one of the largest coal export in the world. So when the energy transition become the global issue, I think it's an advantage to Australia because it's lead to decline in the country foreign exchange earnings. And the second one is the country coal content potential would effective to the unuseful and to its. What's your opinion? Thank you.
Sorry, I was still muted. Sorry, you have to repeat the second part of the question. I didn't fully understand it.
Can you repeat it? Your second question, Pak Siswanto.
When the energy transition to be a global issue, so the problem is the coal is unuseful or to be waste because people in the world use not coal against. So in my conclusion that energy transition is not relevant with the coal because coal is something give carbons. So the issue is the carbonization. Yes.
If I understood the first question correctly, that is the paradoxical situation that Australia has a strong economic reliance on coal exports, despite the fact that we as an economy are committed towards decarbonization. That is an obvious conflict. And the Australian government also is being critiqued and criticized precisely for that reason, that coal exports are not just being maintained, but in fact increased. But it almost seems like, well, it strikes colleagues of mine and I as a last race to get resources to market before people will stop buying coal. You see a gradual shift from coal to gas, even though steel production has been underpinning coal production. And much of the renewable energy technology also still critically depends on coal in the manufacturing process. The other problem is that we have, and I wouldn't single out coal, is our reliance on gas. And what we're now realizing is that the carbon footprint of gas is actually not much better than that of coal. And in some instances, especially if we're talking unconventional gas, shale gas, for instance, that is run through fracking, that the emission profile could be considerably higher than that of coal. So it is both fuel types that are problematic, and Australia is hell-bent of bringing those to market, in a sense, as quickly as possible, because everybody is warning that we could be looking at stranded assets further down the track if we're making multi-billion-dollar investments in further infrastructure developments to support the production and export of these materials. Over the next 10 to 15 years, predictably, the exports will continue, and they probably will also continue to grow, but there will be a cutoff at some stage. It's $1 million question as to when that is. But I think everybody likes to cash in for the time being. As to the future role of coal, we might find other ways. I'm not a materials expert. I'm not 100% certain as to what other useful applications coal will have. There are numerous qualities around coal that don't involve combustion. So in that sense, especially also in the medical field, I would still see a role for coal moving forward. But in terms of the volumes that have been extracted, I see for Australia that in the next 15 to 20 years, a sharp reduction. What we're also seeing, especially in Western Australia, quality coal reserves are exhausted. Over east, in Queensland, we can dig for another 200 years. We have high quality black coal reserves. But in Western Australia, for instance, we're now importing and have been importing coal from Indonesia for the last 15 years because of the poor quality of local coal. So yeah, sorry, I don't think I'm the right person to answer the second question, other than to say that I think coal will continue to play a role, but a much diminished one, and I don't think it will be in the energy context.
Yeah, that's very succinct, and also I think important highlight given by Professor Brueckner, because in Indonesia, same question also appear, how we talk about transition energy, except that in other companies or industry, we still definitely use coal. Yes, Professor Ian Wilson.
Thanks, and it's sort of a question dash comment for both presenters, and thanks for the really great presentations. It seems to me that the language around energy transition, if we look at it in political terms, it's to be frank, it's quite demoralizing. I mean, Martin, you were looking at the role of securitization effectively as a means, in some cases, of bypassing wins that we've had in the past around indigenous control over land. And certainly we've seen similar in Indonesia, where the invocation of energy transition has been used for new resource frontierism, overriding very tenuous traditional land and customary land rights and other things. I guess it's my question, or I'm just interested to hear both of your thoughts, is there a political future for the idea of the just transition? Because it feels like the transition that we're actually seeing, if we look at it, is in many respects quite a regressive one, where we're seeing the imperatives of energy transition resulting in political formations which are not redistributive, they're not increasingly transparent, and they're not increasingly democratic. In many cases, we could say that the process has been captured, and Martin, you did use the language of capture to describe it. What are your thoughts about where this could go? Are there still openings, political openings or other kinds of openings, to push for this energy transition to be a transformative one in terms of better outcomes for marginal communities, and particularly those who, of course, experience climate change in the most immediate sense, which, as we know, is people who are already socially and economically marginal?
Thank you, Pak Ian. Is Professor Dari want to answer, and then Pak Martin? Also, anyone in the audience can answer that. I think I have here a colleague from security sector working study group, Professor Dr. Muhammad Haripin. Maybe you can join in also discussing energy securitization later. So, Professor Dari?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ryan. That's very interesting question, because especially if we look at the Indonesia experience, where we carried out this research, that we look at the Rempang case, and also Cirata, and also Legok Nangka. All of these three sites that we did our field research, they are all regarded, conceived as project strategies national strategic project. Yeah. So it means that the state regard the project is very essential for the economic growth. However, when the state look at the framing this project, as important for the economic growth. Unfortunately, they use all the supporting system to make the project successful. The different in those cases, Rempang is more, I think I can say, more brutal, because the states not only use the regulation, they use the local apparatus or the local business, but also they use the military to remove more than 10,000 people in the Rempang Island. Rempang is 70,000 hectares that will be translated into Rempang ecosystem. So I think in one side we say that energy is important, and is important now and also in the future. But I think the use of the military in this fostering the project, I think is will not be accepted in this democratic in this democratic state, because then the people who have already stayed in that island for more than 100 years, they are not acknowledged. So in terms of just energy transition, I think this is not the example of just energy transition, because one is left behind, and that in this case is the native people. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dari. Martin, do you want to add comments to Pak Ian's comment? I also invite anyone from the forum to add more comment, because this is a very, for Indonesia, it's quite particular, this situation. We have ideas to push energy transition on the one hand, but also some complicated situation regarding the political and also development design since the beginning. That is quite challenging on behalf of the transparency, and especially if we took the energy justice perspective. We had this discussion in Bandung, I believe, with Pak Ian and Murdoch University Academia back then, during our fieldwork in Bandung as well. So maybe I would just invite Pak Dr. Muhammad Haripin to give comment with regard to the securitization of the energy, perhaps before we move to one or two more questions. Pak Haripin, do you want to have comments? Or maybe Ibu Indriana and Awani Erawati also present here, or maybe colleague from Australia. I see Ibu Jane Corno.
Irene.
Yeah?
Okay, Irene, can I have a time to
Yes, please. Yes, please.
to ask? Yeah, thank you for the two presenters. It's Professor Brueckner and Professor Wuryandari. Such a very comprehensive presentations. So these presentations add my knowledge about energy transitions. So I have a simple question actually about the energy transitions. It's quite become increasingly very public knowledge, especially for me. This is a very big concerns for the public knowledge. So we just know about the clean energy, because when we talk about the energy transition, we talk about the clean energy and energy security. So I mean, how to link these two things: clean energy with what we call it, energy security. As far as I know, energy security concerns about how to reduce what we call it, fossil fuel, energy, change to what we call it, we use or increase nature energy like hydro energy or maybe solar energy and wind energy. We have a lot in Indonesia about hydro energy, solar energy, and wind energy to get the what we call it, the main goals about the net, what we call it, net zero emission, yeah, if I'm not wrong. How to link this energy security and clean energy with the existing climate change. Right now, we have we are facing the exploitations about non-renewable energy, like such as Professor Wuryandari have already explained with very comprehensive. I would like to know about the what we call it, the opinion about this. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Martin, you want to take up her question first or Ibundari first?
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Ira. I think when we talk about energy security, we talk about the access, about the reliable, about the affordable, and also the resilience, right? So to make it simple, I think the link between clean energy and energy security. Clean energy, I think, is one of the component of energy security. So rather than treating clean energy and climate policy as separate agenda, clean energy is one of the component of energy. So clean energy can strengthen energy security because it can reduce dependence on carbon fuel or imported fuel, and can diversify energy system, which is make it resilient for energy. I think this is the simple one, the simplest answer that I can give.
And of course, it is the shift to renewables that promises higher levels of energy security, as we've seen with the conflict in the Middle East. We've seen with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has sent energy markets into a spin and has led to physical disruptions of supply chains. And as to the point, as Professor Wuryandari defined energy security in terms of having reliable access to energy, having disrupted supply lines, runs counter to the very notion of energy security. So there has long been the hope that that in itself would be a driver of the green energy transition, in that nations will realize that there's high levels of resilience as far as the energy security is concerned when shifting towards renewables. However, as we've seen with the experience in Europe, where the cutoff from Russian oil was being compensated not by a doubling down of investment in renewables, but a doubling down of efforts to finding alternative gas supplies. So in that sense, Qatari gas was purchased. Is same in Australia in response to the Middle Eastern disruptions of the flow of oil. We immediately went into overdrive to secure the supply of diesel and petrol from alternative options. So the transition is a long-term gain. Ad hoc shocks can never be dealt with through renewables, but it highlights the fragility of a system that is based on on fossil fuel resources that need to be shipped across the world. It only works well if the logistics work, and if we have sufficient geopolitical stability. Given the current state of play and given the future outlook, nations may need to rethink as to how they might go about future energy security, because safe supply chains are no longer given.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very great explanation as well as the question itself. I saw Indriana Kartini, Dr. Indriana Kartini, she is also Melbourne alumni university. Please ask your question now, and to whom? Indri?
Yep. Thank you, Irine, for the opportunity. And I think this is a very important issue. And we already have a discussion as well. But 2 years ago, we also held a seminar on energy transition, but in the context of the EU Green Deal in Indonesia. But now I think it's now learned from Australia. So I have a questions for two speakers. The first is to Professor Brueckner. I'm interested to elaborate more on the issue on the social cultural conflict potential, because in your explanation in your PowerPoint, you also mentioned about the scale of territorial overlap, and you mentioned about the nearly 80% of critical mineral projects intersect with land where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people hold native title and land rights. So I just want to have more elaborate on, because we also have, I think, the same problem in Indonesia, but in Australia, are there any like resistance from the land where from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and from if there are resistances, so how the government navigate the resistance and also the need for the energy transition programs. Because in Indonesia, I think from the project that already explained by Ibu Ganewati, I think in Jakarta, we also heard about the resistance from the local people, and also in the project of in Rempang Eco City. Also, we have a strong resistance from the Melayu ethnic, and also the response of Indonesian government is also, I think it's also they use the military or security officers to respond to the local people resistance. So I just want to know how about in Australia? That's the question from Professor Brueckner. And my question to Ibu Ganewati, from presentation from Professor Brueckner, we have information about that since 2023, the Australian governments have framed the critical mineral as the matters of economic security and the transition security and national security. So I just want to know from the Indonesian side, how about Indonesian government? Is the Indonesian government also frame the critical mineral as a matters of economic security, and also Indonesian government also has like some kind of the report, like the Australian government reports on critical mineral strategy. That's my question. Thank you.
Professor Martin first, and then Mandari.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as to the question of First Nations resistance, that's over 200 years old in many ways, and has a long history. Obviously, resource extraction began over 150 years ago, and in Australia, with localized impacts, and there have been pockets of localized resistance ever since. So in that sense, what especially the critical minerals boom is doing is to simply exacerbate existing problems, because we're looking at more projects in more regions developed at greater pace. So there's an immense acceleration and there's an immense geographic spread of resource extraction. It is certainly true that under legislation, we have prescribed processes. That's under environmental legislation, it's under heritage legislation, and under mining legislation, there are prescribed processes of First Nations engagement. But in many ways, what trumps everything is that fundamentally in Australia, there is a right to mine. So in that sense, resource development has generally a good starting position when it comes to those negotiations. And fundamentally, there is no ultimate veto power when it comes to Indigenous communities in connection with mining, unless an environmental protection authority, for instance, was to find significant environmental grounds, or a heritage commission was to find significant heritage reasons as to why a project should not concede. A community on its own cannot veto processes per se, unless they can increase political risk so much that there's a huge alliance of people that will simply become too uncomfortable for government to support a certain resource project. The problem is with securitization, as described in connection with critical minerals, is that the whole rights to appeal and the entire appeals process is shortened. So whether First Nations communities or otherwise, there's less opportunity to appeal a decision, and generally those appeals are then on procedural grounds, and more often than not, those appeals would be overturned. So I guess to sum this up, that yes, First Nation interests are very much in the frame, largely because of the coinciding of critical mineral reserves on traditional lands, but at the same time, because of the securitization aspect, these rights to oppose a resource development project are greatly curtailed.
Prof. Bandari?
Yeah, thank you, Indri. So I think from your question is actually asking about how the Indonesian government perceive energy transition through the lens of national security, right? Yeah, yeah. I think the Indonesian government looked at the clean energy is not primarily of the issue of climate issue, because we can found from many speech and document that relate that energy transition, or it is part of the national security. From Prabowo Astachitra, it's also clear that energy is part of the government priority. It means that energy, it is part of energy independence, part of the national resilience and national security. Because when we had the independence of energy, it means that we have a strong in economic growth, and then we in the mindset of the government that if we energy independence, also we quite strong from the external caution. So I think energy security is part of the national security, and this is why that government always put energy as part of the government program to be resilient, yeah, in the energy.
Thank you for the question and answer. I think we still have few more minutes. I will invite Nanto Srianto, who is now studying PhD in La Trobe University, to ask question. Nanto?
Thank you, Mbak Irene. Just a simple question. I think I would like to have both presenters to enlighten me about the presentation that of Indonesian hedging and Australian securitization on the energy transition. My question is, could you both enlighten me about whether is it the transition energy in both countries, since you mentioned Australia and Indonesia, also driven by the sub-state actors like the industry itself. Like in Indonesia, we know that when nickel is dominated by China, actually we have an issue whether nickel is gonna be a crucial element of the future electric vehicle industry, or it's gonna stuck merely on providing for steel industry. And in case of Australia, I know that the issue of mining is perceived differently between the states and the federal government. That's the first question. And the second one about the rationality of the just energy transition itself. To a certain extent, I'm quite a skeptic about the rationality of or whether it's just a competing interest between the current the status quo and the future industrial power. So could you elaborate more on who's the interest that's like when inviting Qatar? Why does Qatar? Why does is it Qatar better, or just merely like Indonesian has try to set up a new relations? Because I have read issue about like during Jokowi, we know that Japan and China actually very competitive on the infrastructure, and we can debate whether it is an hedging or at least we playing which one that can goes on. And I think the same can also be in case of Australia, with despite that Australia have more balance of power and more I think better participatory actors among the different political actors. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanto. Very complicated question, but also reflect the intersectionality of issues that Professor Brueckner discussed and Professor Dari. So I would like to address this to Professor Dari first, and then Professor Martin, and then we will take up one more question from Emilia after this two respected source persons. Professor Dari?
Yeah. Hi, Nanto. Thank you for your question. Nanto is always complicated, you know. Yeah, I think I will answer for your first question, the gap of the implementation, yeah, on Indonesian hedging. As my presentation, it's clearly explained about the gap, because when we talk about foreign policy, it seems that in Indonesia, and fortunately that we had discussion yesterday with Indonesian foreign policy group. Yeah, it's clearly there is still clearly differentiation, yeah, between national and local. It seems that foreign policy still in the domain of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, and then disconnect in the implementation in the subnational level, and it is very clearly on the yesterday in the yesterday's discussion. So I think what we need is Indonesian foreign policy, and the Minister of Indonesian Foreign Policy now have a new General Director, Director General of Economic Cooperation. We hope that with the new Director General of Economic Cooperation will bring the bridge of the gap, how to connect between national and also and subnational, because in the national regarding about the energy transition is in the hand of the coordinator Ministry of Economy. So this is one of our challenge in the future, I think. And regarding about the Masdar, we got the explanation when we did our field work in there. Masdar interested to the Cirata project because Masdar, which come from the Uni Arab Emirates, they have experience in building a power plant in land, but they don't have any experience in developing power plant on the reservoir. So they are interesting to invest to the project, and I think underneath to that, of course, that Indonesia also very happy to have Masdar, because most about energy transition Indonesia, I cannot most, but energy transition Indonesia dominated by China. So in line with our foreign policy, no need for me to teach you that, no need our foreign policy doctrine is that we would like to stick to our principle bebas aktif, so less dependent from one dominant major power. I think is better for Indonesia in the future, because it will leave us more room and flexibility in running of our policy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Dari. Professor Brueckner, this is like, perhaps this will add your insights on the material basis of energy transition. Your turn, please.
Well, the way I
So
understood
yeah.
the way I understood the question, it cut straight to the political economy of the energy transition in Australia, as to whether it is actually about green energy or whether it is about other industry interests. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we used the language of the transition rules, in that we also, being mindful of Australia's very tortured history and climate policy. One year we had a carbon tax, but the next year we hadn't. It's what a stop-start. And what we should see, for instance, now is that investments in wind and solar are actually declining since last year. So there's policy uncertainty that still affects investor confidence, and critics would say that this is not entirely accidental. So you would see a shift of the guard from one energy supplier to another, but we still see a very powerful role being played by fossil fuel industries, whose interests are obviously threatened by the renewable energy transition. But we haven't seen a change in the political economy in that regard. And we see, and that comes back to Ian's questions about competing notions of climate justice, and it seems this sort of instrumental accelerationism that is sort of being used. No, we need to because there is a global need for decarbonization, and that basically justifies resource development in the name of a green energy transition at all costs. But at the same time, it serves as a fig leaf for industries and the continuation of their business as usual approach. So in that sense, mining can continue unabated. In fact, it is being accelerated thanks to the green energy transition. And we can all feel very comfortable about the fact that an energy transition is underway, whereas fundamentally questions need to be asked. Are we moving in the right direction? What does that mean about global emissions? What does it mean about national emissions? Are we actually heading in that regard in the right direction? So just the deployment of green energy technology alone is a poor signifier of progress.
Okay.
Thank you so
Then
much, Prof. Now,
then I would,
okay, Mbak Dari want to add comments? Very short.
yeah,
We still have one more.
yeah, I would like to add my answer to Nanto question about Masdar. I think Nanta Masdar is not only a pragmatic reason, yeah, as I mentioned before, because they don't have any experience to build a power plant in the reservoir. It is not the case because Masdar is a business company, right? They would talking about cost and benefit and also about profit is most important. And I think Masdar look at the potential of Indonesia in the future because Indonesia has 244 reservoir and Cirata is only one of them. And we still need in the future about Indonesia in the future for electricity is about 300 terawatts. So in Cirata itself, they still can produce currently only 192 megawatts. So I think Cirata can be looked as the stepping stone to Indonesia market for the future. I think it's very huge market, I think. Yeah, this is
Thank you,
my
Mbak Dari.
additional information. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, now last question will be to Emil, very short.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't only have a question, but only I want to add something for Ibu Indriana and Nanto from the explanation of Professor Ganewati Wuryandari. So about the energy transition in nickel, well, actually it's not only about green and green energy, but it's a product of high level discussion among the head of the states. And then how the government aligned the global maritime program into Belt and Road Initiative that happened start from 2014, 2017 until 2023. So the idea of developing nickel would in the form of IMIP, Indonesia Morowali Industrial Park, already happened since the beginning of Joko Widodo in 2014 and 2015. Now they celebrate the 10th year. So it's been going on. It's not only receiving national interest, but also it's fulfilling Indonesia's strategic interest in the international level. So we have to come through that. And also there are many adjustments on the national regulation in order to make the investment becoming larger and broader in many ways. And then for Nanto, as Professor Ganewati already mentioned, how does China involve in the development of clean energy in Cirata? It's not only Masdar that come from United Arab Emirates. The proposition is that Indonesia 10%, United Arab 10%, and then United Arab Emirates, they have rights to develop and then to sell it into China's investment, including to Sumitomo and other investment. Therefore, 80% from other investment and majority from China. So that's how China involved in the clean energy development in Indonesia. So it's not only from the Middle East, but also from the China. And for Professor Martin Brueckner, I have a question. What do you think that now China is pouring more money on energy investment in Indonesia, either clean energy or green energy? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Emil. Professor Martin?
I think you still mute.
I think you still mute. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I understand correctly whether you were asking whether I think China is putting more money into Indonesia for green or for clean energy?
Clean or green?
Both in green energy and clean energy, because from our research we found that those investments come in both in green energy and clean energy as well. What do you think about it?
What do I think about it? I probably don't know enough to give you the most informed answer on it. The way I understand it, or what is behind the Chinese investment in that space, is largely to bring supply chains closer together. As to what sort of technology China is selling to Indonesia in terms of green or clean tech, I'm unaware of. In that sense, I'm not familiar. What China does in-house, what China does within China is probably the highest per capita investment in renewables. So China goes full steam ahead on that, and probably also sells this technology given the immense overproduction that China sits on in terms of EV, but also in terms of PV panels and the like. So I imagine it is that type of technology that does not only reach Australia, but would also reach Indonesia. As to the critical mineral deals in Indonesia with China, this is about shortening supply chains, and it is also to shifting some of the refining out of China into Indonesia, so that in situ, wherever extraction occurs, that refining occurs as well. That's my understanding, and I think that's what drives much of the investment. As to the technology transfer, I'm less certain of. I would have to speculate.
Thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like to extend my appreciation to all the speakers and all of the colleagues from Australia and Indonesia who attend this very important first session of our collaboration. And for especially our two presenters had shared their insights and engaged audience with such a stimulating discussion. I actually put notes some key points. First, energy transition is more than decarbonization. The second key point is that geopolitics matters for Australia and also for Indonesia. And also, third key point would be domestic government remains crucial as well in Indonesia and in Australia. Although perhaps my perspective, Indonesia is at the moment quite complicated. We have so many political parties, vast interest in energy transition, investments, and so on. And the key point, the fourth point is the communities and energy justice are still usually put into the lowest narrative of the process. So both countries need to think about it and also still discuss the approach. Because energy projects affect communities, livelihoods, and environments. And in terms of comparative perspective, there is one broader lesson that we can take from today's discussion, that there is no single model of energy transition governance. We learn from Australia, we learn from Indonesia. Both countries face different circumstances and have different institutional and economic contexts. But both cases demonstrate that successful transitions requires us to connect several dimensions that are sometimes discussed separately, obviously, such as decarbonizations, material resources, technology, transfer technology, finance, geopolitics, institution, regulations, communities, and justice. But from the discussion, it is clear that those dimensions are interconnected. And a transition that succeeds technologically but creates unacceptable social or environmental costs cannot easily be described as a fully successful transition. Hence, question from Payan and I think Indri also. But similarly, international partnership can provide access to technology, as example from Indonesia, and finance. But the benefits ultimately depend on domestic institutions and the capacity to manage those partnerships strategically. I also have question because this discussion is aired in YouTube, and we can also access a transcript, I think. If presenters mind to be quoted or not, you can also mention it to me or through Pak Ian. But I think interested audience would like to quote the discussion that is recorded live in YouTube as well. So that is my what's it called? Information to both of speakers. So once again, on behalf of the Research of Political Center of BRIN, our sincere thanks to Professor Martin Brueckner and also Professor Ganewati Wuryandari and all the participants that have joined this discussion. We hope that today's discussion will contribute to further research and dialogue on how Australia, Indonesia, and other countries in the region can pursue energy transition that are not only environmentally sustainable, but also economically viable, strategically resilient, institutionally effective, and socially just in terms of the perspectives, of course. Thank you very much for your participation. And with that, we formally conclude today's discussion.